You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hey, people-centric leaders. We are going to talk a little bit about managers today. If you're a manager, go ahead and raise your hand. If you're driving your car, don't raise your hand. Raise your hand. Go ahead. Don't raise your hand if you're driving the car. Okay, now put it down. Bethany, you raised your hand. I just saw you raise your hand. Bethany's on here. You are a manager of people.
Uh-huh.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, I am.
When you became a manager, was your job clearly defined?
That's a good question.
I just jumped right in.
I
Look
think
at that.
so.
It was
Pretty
judgmental.
defined, but I think we defined it more as we
Yeah.
went a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's Bethany. Diana's on with us. Diana, when was the first time you became a manager? When was your first manager job?
Oh, I was only 18.
You were 18 years old and you became a manager?
Yeah.
Okay. And after you went through your extensive training on how to be a manager, what are you shaking your head for?
That didn't happen.
That
I
didn't
was
happen?
18 and literally the the manager was like, here's the keys. You're in charge. Uh, don't burn it down. Like, here you go.
And you supervised other people?
Yeah, like 15 others
15 other people. Good.
that were all like the same age or older than me, right? It was a Hollywood video. I'm dating myself. It was a Hollywood video.
Hollywood. Yeah, we'll talk about that. That was pre-streaming days. That was back in the day.
Yep.
That's good.
I had to
Okay.
write schedules. Like I had to run payroll. I was 18. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, yeah.
You had to run payroll at 18?
Yeah. It was all at a bigger system flow. So it was like not hard. You just had to like, yep, that person actually did the work, or oops, this dude didn't clock in for that shift. It was just checking stuff.
Yeah. And then Stephanie is also on here with us. And Stephanie, you have owned companies before
Yeah.
and managed people and done those roles.
Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to think when you asked Anna the first time I did that. I think I was like 24 and I was working in kind of like a startup environment. And they're like, we need interns and part-time people. Stephanie, go. And so I had to like figure out all of their jobs and their schedules and where they're coming and going and who's doing what. And then like everyone would come and complain to me about the intern, what they didn't like. Like I can wrangle a 19-year-old, right? Like
You can. I would
and
like
get
that.
them, I was like, I don't know. You just told me to hire all of them. I didn't realize I was like responsible for all of their daily activities, but yeah, yeah. And then managing adults is also really fun and interesting many days. And so, yeah, it's
Okay. Well, I like our stories because all of our stories have something kind of in common. My first day on the job at ADM, I was just go walk around the plant and like learn more about the plant. And after about 4 days of doing that, I came in on the next week on the Monday, and the plant manager called me in and said, "Okay, this week you're in charge of the mill. And do you have any questions?" And I was like, "Yeah, what does the mill do? I imagine we mill something. It's a corn plant, so I'm going to guess we mill corn." And suddenly I'm supervising operators who had been around for 35 years and they never found the body of the last engineer who managed that team, right? So we've all had similar management stories, but a lot of times, for one thing we've talked about a lot is that a lot of companies don't train their managers to do what they do. But we're going to talk about something even more basic today. What the heck does a supervisor do? What the heck does a manager do? And what does an executive do? We're going to talk about those different layers of management because sometimes we put out the word manager and we just mean that in terms of anyone who manages anybody, oversees anybody. And it could be an executive, it could be a manager, supervisor. Are there differences in those roles? What does a manager do? Sometimes we even really confuse it and we use the term leader. to say anybody that leads anybody else. And, we would say everybody's a leader. So let's start off with what is the difference between those roles? Like, what does a supervisor do? If we're thinking about different roles and we think about a supervisor, so when we say supervisor, we mean somebody kind of front line, right? So what does the supervisor role entail?
Supervising.
Oh,
Dawn. It's
in the
pretty
name.
easy, you
Okay.
know.
And a manager manages and an executive does executing? Executive? Executive?
Executive.
Executiving.
Executive.
Oh, okay.
Duh.
Yeah. So clearly we're running out of topics on the podcast. So anybody wants some topics, please give us a call immediately because we don't know. We don't know. Webster's dictionary defines management as just kidding. Just kidding, everybody. Diana's lost herself. You can tell when Diana loses it because she hides behind her hair. That's when she goes Wednesday Adams on us.
That's
No, so
true.
what does a supervisor do besides supervising? What does that mean, supervising people? What does that look like?
I mean, they're the most frontline leader, right? Quote unquote leader. So they're not just supervising and watching, right? They're kind of making sure the day to day gets done well, the processes are being followed the way they're supposed to be followed, and that the team is doing what the team is supposed to be doing.
Yeah, so there's something processy in that, right? There's a process that they're overseeing. There's a thing, there's an execution. I am in charge of some people's execution on a process, right? As a supervisor, I supervise them. Super meaning overvise meaning I see. So I oversee that person. Do you see how I pulled out the Greek? Bethany, were you impressed with that? I could tell. I saw you nod like, wow.
It's like, wait, what did you say? Did you say overvise at first?
Yeah, super overvise, see, like vision. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's good. Well, I was gonna add, sometimes supervisors do when you talk about like just the day to day of like if we're getting in the nitty gritty, it might even be like helping manage the schedule and things like that. Or it could be, I think a lot of times supervisors also fold into like training people. So they might be not responsible for like creating what the training looks like, but they might be the ones that are executing on the training and people are shadowing them or whatever. They're helping them understand like how to actually do the work day to
Yeah.
day.
So they're sometimes in the work itself a little bit.
I think a lot of supervisors are working supervisors, right? They can't just solely supervise people or train people. It's they also are doing the work as everybody else is doing the work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that because like if they're in charge of a specific process, then there might be moments where they jump in and do some of the work to ensure the process happens the way it should, or they'll fill gaps on their team to make sure the process can happen in the right way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's well said. So where do supervisors tend to fail in their job? So I'm sure we have a lot of people who are of a supervisor job who are listening to this. Where do we see supervisors make their mistakes?
Well, I will say one of the first mistakes I made as a supervisor is really trying to make a lot of changes because I was like, "Oh, great. If I'm in charge of this process, I'm gonna change it and make it better." And that was not part of my role. I learned out very quickly. I learned very quickly. It was not part of my role to make said changes. I could suggest changes, but I could not go and just like automatically implement those.
Yeah, I would add, I see supervisors fail at training very frequently. So they do just a lot of telling. Like they're just telling people what to do. You do that, you do that. And then if somebody's like, well, what am I supposed to be doing? They'll be like, you're doing that. Go do that thing. And they don't always do a great job of like teaching people how to do something or noticing when someone needs to be trained on something. I feel like a lot of supervisors will tend to have a little more black and white view of like you either can do it or you can't, instead of saying like, oh, I observed someone doing this maybe the wrong way or in a way that's not aligned with our process, instead of going to them and like doing a little coaching or saying like, hey, like I think we need to go back through this training. They're just like, that's wrong. Don't do that.
Yeah, I like that. I know another area that we think that I was talking to a supervisor just recently who had an employee that they weren't doing their job very well. Like they weren't performing very well. So we talk about the job of a supervisor is you have to be able to evaluate performance, right? Versus a process. And then you have to be able to give feedback on that performance. And my question was, as they were talking about this person, they said, I don't think the person knows what they're doing. I don't think they spend enough time doing their job. And I said, well, like, what have they said when you've given them the feedback that you don't think they're performing very well? And the answer was, well, I haven't talked to them about it yet. And I'm like, well, how long have you been seeing this? And how long has it been? Well, I've been seeing this for several months now and not leaning into it. And a lot of people are going to listen to hear that and like, you have to say something before several months. But this is super common as a supervisor that we see people not giving the feedback, not saying, hey, I am seeing this, and this is not going very well. Or even saying, hey, this is going really well and you're doing a great job. We see a lot of supervisors. We saw a study that was that was shared by Harvard Business Review that said that 69% of supervisors are afraid to talk to their people about anything. And so a lot of times we see supervisors not talk to their people at all. They don't give the feedback. They're not having the meetings. They're not discussing. They're not sharing the feedback that they have. They've got the thoughts in place, but they're not actually saying the things. So then they're not addressing it. So then they can't take the next steps of saying, do I coach them? Do I hold them accountable? What does that look like in terms of the next steps that we're taking? Okay, so the supervisor, we talked about them. They're very connected to the process. They've got people directly reporting to them that are performing in the process. The supervisor is evaluating things, judging whether the process is good enough, training people on how to do the process, and then watching them and seeing how are they performing within that process. So that's a supervisor role. Super meaning overvise, meaning seeing, oversight. Bethany, that's how those two words come together. Supervise. So let's talk about managers now. And so a manager is the next level up in the org chart. So managers have supervisors underneath them. How does that change your role as a manager? What does the manager do? What's the manager day to day versus the supervisor's day to day?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Diana.
I
What were you
was
gonna
I was gonna say I think that manager's the first time that you're now leading other leaders, which changes the dynamic a little bit. What were you gonna say, Bethany?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. And sometimes managers don't necessarily have supervisors under them. It depends on the company or the structure, right? But yeah, so they're maybe have some other people that are helping support the team, but they're a little bit more, they just have another level of responsibility to help meet with the team more regularly on a regular basis to kind of coach and train in a different way. They might not be as in the middle of the work. Some organizations you would have like working managers as well, but they might be pulled out of the day to day a little bit. They're not, shoulder to shoulder sometimes with their employees. They might kind of have their own thing that they're working on, and then they're helping support their employees in a little bit of a different way, a little bit more zoomed out. Yeah, what else?
Yeah, I'd say that also managers are very much thinking about the team that's around them and how their team interacts with other teams next to them. So if I'm looking at the org chart and you look across the org chart, horizontally, and you think about manager, 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 the managers are the ones that should be working to break down silos. They should be reaching, okay, my team works with your team over here. How do our teams work better together? What does that look like? So they're not just thinking about the process, but also, do I have the right people on the team in a lot of ways, right? Supervisors sometimes have limited ability to change who is on their team. Managers have a little bit more ability to look at and say, do we have the right people on our team? And sometimes even, do we have enough people on our team? Managers are also the ones that are going to be more likely to say, I'm just assessing capacity of what we're going to be building, and I need to be able to grow that. I think about, we worked with a magazine years ago who was they were putting in a new title, a new magazine that they were going to put out. And we had the management team around for the managers of the different departments. And we were talking about producing a whole extra magazine every year. And one of the managers goes like, my team who does the ads is going to have a lot more ads to create if we do this magazine. And the whole team looked around and the manager goes, yeah, you're right. And the manager stopped for a second and looks and says, wait a second, that's my job to figure out what we need to be able to do that. And everybody went like, that's right. Now it's suddenly your job. You're not just living within the process of creating the magazine every day. Now you're a little bit outside that of saying we've got a new magazine coming. So now I have to think a little bit about my team and how do I design my team to be able to be more effective inside of that. So she had to think about, okay, I've got to scale my team, or can we handle it with the team we already have? What's that going to look like? And how do we work together with the other teams to produce this extra magazine? So, yeah. All right. So where do managers struggle when we see managers fail? Where do we see managers fail?
I think a lot of the time it's the same place that supervisors do, right? It's hard to teach people, it's hard to coach people, and it's hard to talk to people about performance. Like that's a top to bottom tough issue to crack.
Yeah. So if you're a manager, you're still a supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a key point, right? Like if you're a manager, you still supervise some people underneath you. And if you're a manager, you're less, maybe you're not going to give that feedback. And there might be different reasons. Like you said, I just don't want to talk to them, or it could be I'm really stuck. I've got
Mm-hmm.
more of the day-to-day stuff that I have to worry about. Maybe I've got a wider range of responsibilities. And so I tend to not spend as much time or don't have as much time to spend with my team.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's that. I think there's also sometimes managers go the other direction and they're like too involved with everything. And so I think people swing between those two of like, I don't talk to my team, or I don't know how to give them feedback, or I don't pay enough attention to them, or to the far other side where it's like, I just have to know exactly what they're doing, and I better make sure they have checklists. And I don't know if, I'm going to have to check in on everything all the time because I want to make sure that I'm doing my job and they're doing their job, and nothing gets out of order. And so that's, your micromanager, which we see a lot
Mhm.
too.
Yeah, that's well said. No one says they want to be a micromanager, but a lot of people would say the words you just said. Like, I got to check in on my team. I got to make sure they're doing the things that they want are doing. And supervisors can kind of get away with that because you're really focused on a process, but managers now can't because of what you said. Because if you're focused on all that stuff, you can't be doing all of those different things all at once.
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar to Bethany with that of like they're managers who they answer everyone's question, they solve everyone's problem for everyone. And so even if they feel like they're not micromanaging, I'm not telling you how to do that, but like every time you ask me a question, like, where's that? Oh, it's right there. How do you do that? You do that this way. And they really become the person that no one can work without. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of managers because they get this like working manager mindset and this badge of like, well, I've got to show my team that I'm in it just as much as they are, and that I'm not asking them to do things that I wouldn't do. But then they become the roadblock of like, well, now nothing can happen without you because every task has to come to you, every question has to come to you. You're double checking everybody's work. And then at the same time, nobody really knows why we're doing any of this because you're also not sharing like the common goals or the common purpose or the common why of like why we're doing these things or why we launched this new process or project. And we're not connecting people back to like goals that the maybe leadership team above has set for the company or even the mission. Like they're not really talking about why we're all even here doing this.
Yeah, I do think that the manager level is the first time you start feeling really stuck in the middle. You start to feel the pressure from the top of the executives and what the company needs, and you feel the pressure from the bottom of what the employees need and what the process needs and what all, and you're that middle person that's stuck between those two levels. And like, how do you sometimes satisfy competing interests?
Yeah, yeah. So the supervisors are people process focus. The managers are people process, but then they add team focus to it of thinking not just how is the person going, how's the process going, but also how are my teams doing overall. There's an old saying, I say it's an old saying. It might be one that we just made up. It might be one that I've just said, but I've been saying this lately of saying like good leaders get things done. Great leaders create more good leaders. Like that's so you're starting to think a little bit differently about that from the supervisor job. The supervisor can get away with diving in a little bit in the details. Now, some of you are listening might be a manager and say, but the supervisor job you described sounds more like what I'm doing. And I'm going to answer you, and this is going to be the tough love part, is just saying, yeah, that's why we're doing this podcast. That's why we're doing this episode, is because a lot of managers manage like they were a supervisor, which kind of makes sense because if you think about it, the role that we didn't talk about is if you're an employee, you're just worried about people, right? You're working within yourself within that process. And then when you become a supervisor, and if you're not trained on how to do it, you're still focused on what you used to do and then learning what others do. So you get into the process side to be able to compensate for that. And then you become a manager and you think you just have to do that again, except with all the different teams and all the different processes that are under you. And at some point, that becomes unscalable for yourself. And we see some managers get stuck in supervisor mode or managers who some people are really, really effective at it, but they just run themselves crazy and have no control over their time. They're not thinking strategically because they still manage like a supervisor. They still get stuck in the details. All right, let's go up another level. And by the way, some of you, I recognize, like we work with some organizations that are really, really big. So when we say that we're talking about three different levels here, some of you may be listening to this going, yeah, we have 10 different levels, right? Yeah, we work with an organization that they've got leads, supervisor, managers, directors, admin directors, vice presidents, senior vice presidents, executive vice presidents, and they go all the way up the organization. So we're recognizing that. But we're kind of just for today's discussion, we're just going through three different levels of leadership. By the way, if you do have one of those organizations that has all those different levels, is it important for you to understand what each of those levels is asking you to do in the next level? The answer is heck yes, it is. It's very important to get granular and understand what those different levels do. And if you're also listening to this, side note, this is bonus material, and you're saying, well, yeah, but we're not really very good at the title discipline thing. We have some titles that we give some, like a director over here might not be doing the same thing that a director does over here. Yeah, that's called lack of role clarity, and that is a critical problem inside the organization. It's something you've got to work on to fix. So that might be an opportunity for you. But all right, back on track. We talked about supervisors, people process. We're talking about managers now, people process teams. What happens when does the executive do now as you get up into the executive roles?
You do whatever you want. It doesn't matter because
That's the
you're the
sweet part about
boss.
it. That's what we're telling you. Yeah,
No rules.
No rules,
You can do everything or nothing.
no responsibility.
yeah. That's how I feel. My job
Make the
is,
big bucks. I don't know what happens up there.
yeah.
Yeah, you just get the other people to do all the work and you just take home the big bucks, right? And you make one big decision every once in a while so people know you're still there.
As the CEO of People Centric, I did not know you guys understood my job so clearly. That is so great. The only part that you didn't add is I like to Scrooge McDuck in the money. I have to go, I like to pile the money in the room as full as I
You do
can and
that.
just swim around in it for a while. You know,
I don't know where that room is, but I would like to know.
you'd like it. Would it be funny if that was the money booth? Because you're kind of in the booth in our office right now. Would it be cool if like we could hit a button right now and money just started flying around the booth? Like, you're in the money booth. Beep, beep,
Like
beep.
I
This is what
drop
we're
through
doing.
the floor and it's like this giant pit of money.
Yeah, that'd be, well, oh, she knows where our money is, Diana. Uh-oh. It's not good. So I'm
I
in the
haven't found the
basement.
button though. I haven't found the
Yeah.
button.
So now what is really the role of the executive? Let's ask that. I mean, they don't Scrooge McDuck. There is still responsibilities, and we know a lot of executives, frankly, who don't have a lot of control of their time. We talk about being in executive quicksand, and we've done episodes on that, and they get stuck in it. So what is the added responsibility of the executive?
I would say like the executive should be more focused on like goals and strategy. So like what are the goals we're trying to achieve this year and creating some plans around how we might achieve them and then sharing those with the managers so that the managers can work with their supervisors and frontline people to execute those goals. They're thinking a little more futuristically in their role instead of, hey, here's what's happening today and how we're going to manage this pile of work today. They're thinking like, what's coming down the pipe? Like, what could our work look like 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now? So they're a little more future focused and goal focused in their role versus like, how will we execute this piece of work today?
Yeah, I like that. Anything else we would add in terms of manager roles or executive roles? Excuse me.
Executives. Yeah, I think executives are generally also still managers, right? We're still managing people generally, and probably doing some supervising of some process or procedure, whether that's a strategic process or something. So they're kind of doing all of the levels in one role.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of interesting because when you hear that, like you're just picking things up as you go up. Do you get to put things down, or does the job just keep getting harder?
Yeah, you should be able to put down some of those, especially like the frontline stuff. So, I mean, yeah, you're picking stuff up and you're probably dropping something off at every at every stop, right? Some of the more I don't want to say it this way, but some of the more basic functions, right? But if you're doing the work of a frontline employee as an executive, um, you shouldn't be probably. I think
Yeah,
sometimes people look at that and they're like, that's great. I love a leader who does that because they know what it's like. They're still in the game. And I understand the intention of that. But if that's taking up all of your time, and then something's probably off balance.
yeah. I liked it. I hadn't thought about this until just now, Bethany, when you said it. It's like when you get promoted into a role, sometimes you hear somebody say, "Well, I'm going to take on this new role." And they don't think about what are you going to offload? You're taking on something else. And like we know we're taking something on, but we don't think about what are we putting away? What are we putting down? And you're right, it's going to be some of the roles of the processes and things like that. So like the supervisor can get lost in the details of the day-to-day process and be lost in that part of it. The manager can get lost a little bit in the team and a little bit on the process side. Now, the executive and the managers and the executives have to start thinking about how do I create more supervisors so we don't have to worry about the process side of things, right? They have to add that skill set that people struggle with so much of delegating, allowing others, creating new leaders, doing that kind of thing. And if, like we said, if the executive doesn't do a good job of also being a supervisor, meaning not just the process side, but the people side, they don't realize that the executive has people that report underneath them, then they really, really struggle with that, right? And then that's a real problem. A lot of times we see executives are the worst individual managers. Like if you work for an executive, you are less likely to get attention, probably, especially like a CEO. Like people who work directly for a CEO would you all agree with that? I'm saying something that might be not true or not. Would you agree that somebody who works for a CEO in a high level executive position are less likely to get one-on-one attention than somebody who works for a manager or a supervisor?
I think generally that's true. Yeah.
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 And then the question is, what's the impact on the organization if that is true?
Yeah, I think what we see when that's happening is then you have leaders that really aren't aligned and they might not be completely misaligned, like taking the organization in completely different directions, but they're not exactly on the same page of like where we're trying to take the company and like do we want to grow? How do we want to grow? What would we change? And so they might be leading their teams kind of down different paths, or they're creating very different like cultures. That's where you'll see an organization, I think, that has different like subcultures here versus over there. It feels very different because they're not aligned on even like how they're leading or what the culture is and what the values are that are really important to us to uphold because they're not totally aligned on how they're leading the company.
I
Yeah.
think you also miss a lot of modeling. Like if you're asking your managers or directors or whoever's right below you to go and do check-ins every month and do a performance evaluation, but you're not doing that for your people, like I think you miss stuff there. And so I think that goes for everything, right? If you expect your leaders to do something that you're not doing for them, they're not going to go do it for their people either.
Yeah, yeah. People have a basic need for being developed, which means they want somebody that knows them, pays attention to them, and helps them develop their own strengths. And we know that just from a very basic observation from companies that we work with, is if you take an executive and they're not doing regular one-to-one meetings with their people underneath them, then the people underneath them probably aren't going to do it for very long either. Like they're gonna shadow what they see from above all the way down the organization. When executives go outside of the rules and they don't meet with their people on a regular basis, that tends to go all the way down. Yeah. So if you think about a big picture, like we talked about, supervisor side picks up the people process, and the manager goes people process team with a little less process and a little more team. And then the executive picks up now like systems, right? The organization, the big picture, like I can change the whole organization on working towards things. Then they're going to put down more process, put down a little bit of team. But the one thing that all three of those levels cannot put down is the people side of it. We often call that the golden rule, right? It's the golden rule. You get it? Instead of the golden rule, it's a golden rule. It's pretty good. You
I
guys are not impressed.
got it.
Okay. Okay. But the golden rule is that anybody in that management position, supervisor position, executive position, you still are a supervisor of people. And if you think about it within an organization, if you fail on every other part of your job, but everybody all the way up and down the organization was really good at meeting with their people on a regular basis and developing them and managing them one-on-one, that whole organization would function way better than it does. Even if they're not as good at the strategy, even if you're not as good at the process and things. If everybody just had good relationships up and down and helped to develop and support the person underneath the people who report directly to them, you would see, I would like to think of it as blood flow up and down the organization. Like it just makes the whole organization healthier in terms of what they're able to perform.
Yes, agreed.
Agreed. That's what I was looking for. There was a
That's
big
great.
pause. Thank
That's
you.
great, Don.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So, what are the last tips? That's the topic that we wanted to throw out today is what's the difference between those different levels? There's a significant benefit in laying that out for everybody. So, any final thoughts for our listeners here?
I mean, I think we all said it's hard to connect with people on a personal level and on a leadership level. It's hard to like make that intentional time to connect with the humans, but it is the thing that keeps leadership leaders. That's what makes you a good leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's sort of funny, Don, you asked me at the beginning about like, was my role clear, I think, or something like that when I became a manager, which I think that's a great question just to ask with wherever you're at within the organization. Like, is your role clear? And if it feels like you are in a position in one of these positions that we talked about, and it's not aligned with what we just said and how we described that role, I think it'd be good to talk to your leader about that a little bit and say, hey, maybe send them this podcast if it's a helpful just resource to help provide context for why you're asking those questions, and to say, are there things that need to be adjusted within your role, or do you need to start doing something or stop doing something within your role to make sure that you're leading at the right level? And if you don't know how, or if you feel like you don't have the skills for that, again, like bring that up to your leader and talk about what it would look like to be able to get some training or support or some coaching to make sure that you're successful in your role at whichever level you're at.
Yeah, yeah. If you want to move up in the organization, if you're ambitious and you want to learn how to do those things really well and do it in a way where you still have some control over your life and your job, because there's a lot of really unhappy executives. And I think it's because they are unable to put down the other jobs as they move up. They just keep taking on more things. I just keep taking on more stuff. It's learn that people role that you have to play all the way up down there. Supervisors, managers, it's developing the relationships and understanding what that means. And then if you can do that really well, then you're developing that next generation so that as you move up, then you have people below you that you trust that are handling the things. And that becomes much, much easier. It is way easier to manage a team of rock star supervisors, and it's way easier to executive a team of rock star managers if you've created that down below you as you move up the organization. So we hope that that was a useful topic for you all as you think about where you're at, whether or not you're thinking about getting promoted, what skill sets do you need to develop? I think we gave you some insights to that. If you own a business or are an executive in a business, are those roles really defined? Is that something that you are really clear about as you go up and down the organization? If they are not, then you are missing that connection to people that people really need to be able to be engaged in their job. And that is costing you money and time. And it's keeping you from being more people centric. So thanks a lot for joining us in the podcast today, and send us your ideas and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to the People Centered Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and lead well.